welcome. My name's Eddie Grant, and I've been joined by my colleague Hannah Kofi. I am the director responsible for advice policy in St James's Place, and Hannah is responsible for, or is head of vulnerability and client assistance in St James's Place. Hello, Hannah. How are you today?
Morning. Yeah, very well, thank you. Yourself?
Yes, very good, and absolutely looking forward to having this conversation with you today on what is essentially an incredibly important and evolving subject. From our point of view, what we're going to do is sort of weave through the subject. We've got no slides, and we're doing that deliberately so that we can have a conversation with ourselves, but also with you as well. We have a Q&A function. Please use that function and submit your questions. We will do our absolute best to try and pick those questions off during the session. If we don't, then we will deal with those questions offline and come back to you. And always at the same time, there's the SJP partnership who can help answer your questions, but also have access to us as well. Without any further ado, Hannah, I think one of the sort of good way of starting off is just think about this whole context of digital assets, but in the context of vulnerability and in terms of the regulator. There's been a big focus around supporting individuals with vulnerability. Do you want to explore a little bit about that, please?
Of course, yeah. So lovely to be talking to clients there, I think, versus financial advisors. That's a totally different audience to me. So let me try and make sure I'm positioning this correctly, because it's a change for me. So I don't want to revert back to type. So cover off the kind of the regulatory aspect then. The financial services is governed by the FCA. So that's a regulatory body that I guess kind of ultimately makes sure that we are behaving ourselves. And they've been looking at vulnerability, which is their term, not one that St James's Place put into play, since about 2015. And actually prior to COVID, although I imagine that's ramped up their thoughts and processes about it since, but they released their finalised guidance on consumer vulnerability, so that's client vulnerability in our case here, in around February 21. And although an interesting choice of words to use, vulnerable, I think if they could go back and change their mind on that, they probably would. They did it with the best intentions. And so ultimately what they were looking to do across the industry, across the board, was to protect clients with a kind of key focus on anybody who'd become vulnerable or had a vulnerable circumstance. They wanted to make sure that firms, so that's the likes of St James's Place and your partner that then provides the advice to you, were treating all clients fairly, but of course, particularly clients in those vulnerable circumstances. We're making sure that ultimately clients in a vulnerable circumstance had a good outcome, and that financial advisors sought to foresee against foreseeable harm. So that's linking back vulnerability with consumer duty. So that's the kind of newer regulatory guidance that's come out recently. So what does it mean to talk about vulnerability then? And I think it's a real key thing that we separate a vulnerable circumstance with vulnerable driver. And how would I kind of define the two? So I think a vulnerable circumstance is ultimately the driving force behind the vulnerability. So that's the trigger. So be that bereavement, ill health, the divorce. And vulnerability is ultimately the individual, the human, the client's kind of response to it, I guess. So, you know, we will all respond to things in a totally different way. Even a bereavement, you would respond to two different bereavements quite differently. You know, if you were to lose a partner or a child, I imagine that's quite an acute kind of pain and a difficult circumstance to get yourself through, versus a long lost cousin. Perhaps it would impact you, it would make you think about your mortality, but it probably wouldn't affect you in quite the same way. So even one individual can experience bereavement totally differently. And bereavement is a driving factor of vulnerability. And the FCA say that all circumstances of vulnerability, so bereavement, divorce, retirement, even say, for example, they sit naturally within one of 4 key drivers, which is how they're educating us to then ultimately be aware to help and support you should one of these circumstances arrive. And these 4 key drivers are health, life events, resilience, and capability. And I'll give you some examples that they've put in and amongst that. So within health, you've got things like a physical disability, a severe or long-term illness, a hearing or visual impairment or decline at some point in time. Life events, relationship breakdown, domestic abuse, caring responsibilities, bereavement, I've talked about. Resilience is things like over-indebtedness, low savings, low emotional resilience, perhaps. And in capability, they've talked about things like low knowledge or confidence in managing your finances, poor literacy, poor English skills, or English as a second language. So those are the kind of things that they're asking financial advisors to be aware of. And so ultimately, I imagine that's perhaps starting to creep into some of the conversations that you're having with your financial advisor, your partner here at SJP, that perhaps you weren't having previously. Hopefully, maybe they don't always necessarily talk about that in a vulnerability way, because I try desperately to educate them that no one's really going to ultimately say, yes, I'm vulnerable. You know, if I were to ask any of you if you're vulnerable, very few of you will put your hands up and say I am. But share myself, for example, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm vulnerable and I live and work in this world. I'm actually due to have my first baby in September, and I have undeniably struggled of late. I find myself, I don't know what on earth the future holds. I don't know what I've let myself into. I have to walk away from my job for a year, and I've got no idea what the company will look like when I come back. You know, I'm interviewing for people to kind of step in and take over. Emotionally, I'm a bit of a mess too. And then all of a sudden, you've got to pay for things and think about powers of attorney and wills and expression of wishes and critical life care and stuff in case something were to happen to me. You've all of a sudden got much bigger responsibilities, and it's, you know, having a baby is a lovely thing, but actually there are a lot of knock-on effects of things that you have to think about. So you would, I guess, or a financial advisor might be aware of saying that perhaps I am in one of those vulnerable circumstances. I might not ultimately be vulnerable, so that's the circumstance and the driver differentiation, but it's something to be aware of because ultimately my financial needs are changing at this point in time. Did I answer your question there, or did I go off on a bit of a tangent?
No, I thought that I thought that was brilliant, and I can obviously assure you that there will be a job to come back to, and we are absolutely looking forward to seeing the baby pictures and you bringing the baby back to the office as a new recruit. And I think it's really, I think it's really interesting, this whole sort of concept of vulnerability and the spectrum of vulnerability. And I think we're all complex, and like many people, I'm complex. I'm a carer. I've been met my wife at school. I've been married 35 years this year, and obviously that, you know, means that the way I operate, the way I work, means that I have responsibilities. Also, I seem to tick a number of boxes now. My father-in-law died in January, and so that bereavement has obviously had an impact on my life. And I'm dyslexic, so as you know, I use pink paper and pink cards and everything to help me understand that, and recently diagnosed with ADHD as well. So how do I work? And everything has an impact. So I think that what I've learned over the years is everyone is complex. I, like you, am not a great fan of the word vulnerability, but I think there's a responsibility for all providers for any service to think about how do you communicate and how do you support clients. And today's session is very much around the whole sort of digital assets and digital capability. And I think it's probably worth just thinking about that. And, you know, in a world where we're driving everyone to turn off paper statements, which is a really positive thing to do, great for the environment, means that you have accessible data. The SJP app, if I am allowed to make a plug for that, the SJP app I've got, and I'm far more engaged looking at the SJP app, being able to easily get my data and monitor things. So for me personally, it's worked really well. But I think it's also important to think about where it doesn't, where digital isn't someone's sort of most comfortable place to be. So obviously SJP and SJP partners are there to help clients to become comfortable with the digital world. And if that doesn't work, then obviously we still have paper and we still can look after you in other ways. But a transfer for digital has definitely worked for me. And we now, reminds me that so much of my life now is on my phone. And that creates a slightly different issue, which is obviously what we're going to talk about today. So when I think about digital assets and when I talk to clients about it, a lot of people sort of think about, their online banking, their different stores. I know some people have different accounts like Ancestry and all of that. Well, all of that is password protected. All of that means that there's quite a big footprint for us all. And a lot of it is controlled by your thumb on your mobile phone or your facial recognition. So what would happen to me if I was incapacitated or my family were bereaved? Also, a lot of my life, I think I last count was 54,000 pictures on my phone. Significantly more than when my grandmother died about 10 years ago. She had about 10 photo albums. And we picked up the photo albums. In fact, I took them home and made a promise to my family that I would scan every one of those photos and share with them. I can tell you that's probably the biggest mistake I ever made. It's a massive job. It's a very complicated job, and it's not one that's easy to outsource to someone because it's quite expensive to do. The other thing is obviously social media as well. We have lots of different accounts. So our life is more complex. STEP, who's an organisation that's an estate planning organisation, asked some solicitors about digital assets and the questions, and 58% of solicitors said in the last 12 months they had taken queries about digital assets. So there's definitely an increasing number of people asking the question about digital assets, how to deal with them. If I was to break it down into different component parts and try and explain the different bits. The first bit about digital assets is we all have our devices, our laptop, our iPad, our gaming devices, our phones. So all of those devices. So those devices, you obviously they're chattels, and you can pass them on if you wish to do as devices. But actually, a lot of our life now is in cloud accounts. So if we think about financial accounts, we think about email storage, social media, all of that. Those accounts, we all do it. We get terms and conditions pops up. We all scroll through really quickly. And I wonder how many people actually read line by line the terms and conditions before they click the accept button and submit. And the problem is, it's those terms and conditions that become very relevant when you're incapacitated or when your family are bereaved, because they will then set the rules to how that account can be used and what the rules are. And I'm pretty certain in most of those, there'll be rules around not sharing your passwords and everything else. So the rules are there, they're tight, they're deliberately tight. And the issue is that we probably don't all read them as well as maybe we should do. And that maybe there's a bit of thinking sometimes that the people aren't going to do that. You then have digital property rights. So if you're thinking about stuff that has copyright, if you do podcasts, if you have your financial accounts, all of those rights can be gifted away in your will or during your lifetime, or to put into trusts. So they're all assets that you can actually gift. And I'll come back to wills a little bit later, because there are things you can do, should do, and probably don't do, which I think are probably worth considering about. You then have what is known as digital property interest, so things like crypto, blockchain, and gaming tokens. So a lot of people have this type of asset. Once again, it can be gifted, but someone was telling me yesterday, for crypto, they've got a 24-character password for their crypto account, and they absolutely didn't want to share that with anyone, which I totally understand. And so therefore, what happens in a death or incapacity situation, and how do you deal with that? But those assets you absolutely can gift away. The one area that is really challenging is when you think about digital records, and you think about videos, photos, my 54,000 photos, emails, storage. Now these are assets which, unless there's copyright on the photos, for example, these are assets which are harder to gift away, but actually are the emotional bit. And they are the things that people really get anxious about how will those photos be shared. And really what I hope to do in this session is to explain what you can do, what's the best route. I personally, with my own situation, have sort of worked out how my family will have access to my passwords, and we'll talk a little bit about that and how that can be done. But the key is the emotional bit is very much the photos and everything else. Everything else can be tidied up and dealt with in your will, if you wish to do so. It was quite interesting step as well. They did a survey of solicitors, and they sort of asked them what was the most common question that they had. 35% of the responses said it was all about privacy and data protection. And I think it's quite interesting also to ask yourself is how much of the stuff on your phone would you be comfortable with that being passed on to your family on your death or incapacity? You know, my wife has total access to my phone. I have no problem with that. But I can imagine that some people may not want everything shared or passed on. So how will you deal with that? What is it that you've done to ensure that the information you want passed over is passed over? 29% of the queries that solicitors were getting were all about families trying to pass the right assets to the next generation, and 27% were families trying to access content because someone had become incapacitated or died, and the family were left unable to access the content that they wanted to access. So this is an increasing issue for solicitors, and in the survey, the solicitors were essentially saying, I think it was 72%, were saying that there needs to be more education for clients, and this is an area that really they feel that people should be planning into their wills and looking at that. One of the things that I did is I did a little bit of work looking at how different companies operate. So in terms of SJP, if you go onto the SJP website, and you see you've got a help and support quick link on the homepage, and then there's a button which talks about helping you in difficult times. we then take you through into bereavement and various other things. We try and make it easy. When I looked at other companies, Monzo, really good, set up for help and support. I'm a big LinkedIn user, and LinkedIn isn't particularly set up for what happens if I was to die. And so looking at different companies, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever it is, Amazon, looking at how they operate and looking at their terms and conditions, and just making sure that what you expect is going to happen is actually going to happen. And the final bit before I sort of pass back to Hannah is one of the really good things to do is to really have an inventory of your assets. So in your conversation with your SJP partner, we ask you what assets you've got, but also the sort of questions around what digital assets have you got, what social media, how you're going to look after your photos. All of that sort of conversation, I think, is really important. And we may not know the answer to every single one of those questions, but obviously the partner has access to myself and Hannah. But more importantly, there are other organisations that we often refer to that can help you. And having this sort of digital asset inventory is a good place to start to think about your different assets, how you want them dealt with, and start the sort of thought process to dealing with that. One of the things, Hannah, that I think would be really helpful when thinking about vulnerable circumstances and the experience you've got, are some of the myths that bounce around, that perhaps you could dispel, and also demonstrate how SJP can help.
Yeah, of course. So we talked about well, we've shared circumstances ourselves, and I talked about the FCA, so that's the regulatory guidance on vulnerability. But I just wanted to share with you some statistics as well before I dig into those myths, just to hopefully shine a light on how mythical the myths might be, I guess. So the FCA have done quite a bit of research on vulnerability over the last couple of years, and of course I've got a couple of statistics in here from other places. So just to let you know, then, the FCA say that 50% of the UK adult population have one or more characteristic of potential vulnerability at any one point in time. So that's 25.6 million individuals. They talk about how 26% of UK adults have little or no confidence in managing their money. 46% of those UK adults report low knowledge about financial matters on the whole. 20 million, now that would be quite large. 2 million UK adults say they have a defined contribution pension and have received their annual statement in the last year, but simply don't understand it, or don't understand it well at all. There are over 2 million people in the UK living with sight loss. 12 million adults in the UK have hearing loss, tinnitus, or are actually registered as deaf. 17.3% of children in England have special education needs, and 4 in 5 adults do not have a lasting power of attorney set up. So hopefully that kind of highlights, actually any one of us can be vulnerable at any one point in time. So let's look at some of the myths that we have. The first and classic one is, although I've admitted openly that vulnerability is not the best term, perhaps, but that people believe that vulnerability is simply a weakness, and therefore they don't want to be acknowledged with any of these vulnerable circumstances. That clients can sometimes believe that their personal well-being has no impact on their financial well-being, or that it goes the other way around, that their financial well-being has no impact on their personal well-being, and therefore they don't want to share any personal information with their financial advisor, simply because I think they believe that financial advisors and financial advice can't help. Whereas actually, hopefully what we're going to show you is good financial advice can help put you back in that driving seat when you feel like you've lost control a little bit, or direction. That wealth mitigates health. And by that, I mean, for those of us who have substantial investments or you know, good investments with SJP, that's somehow going to protect us and our family and our loved ones from any kind of critical illness diagnosis or some form of ill health at some point in time, whereas actually, unfortunately, money sometimes for us can't protect us from these things simply. The investments also insinuate capability. Again, that's not necessarily fair. You know, you can be very educated individuals. Some of you, I'm sure, have had brilliantly high-powered jobs and are very intelligent people, but quite naturally, not everybody will be as understanding as in financial advice as their peers say. And of course, I would assume your financial advisor should be able to provide you with more of an understanding in financial advice too. That having significant wealth and intelligence will somehow protect you from scammers or automatically put you in a position where you are more likely to go through kind of fraud or even see abuse from potential family members. Again, that you know, the two aren't necessarily directly linked with one another, and unfortunately scams nowadays, especially in the increasing cleverness of the digital world, are rife. And we do know many people who actually unfortunately succumb to these kinds of scams and fraud and don't quite know how to get themselves out of it, or believe, you know, if they've fallen foul of a scam or a fraudulent behavior, having noticed it themselves, are then embarrassed, I guess, or ashamed of themselves and don't want to share it with others. There are a million kind of examples I could give you, but you know, ultimately for me, I think financial advice can help you in a number of ways, perhaps that people don't automatically think about. So financial advisors are going to help talk about things like powers of attorney. So remember that 4 in 5 individuals don't have a power of attorney set up, but undeniably, we have to face our mortality at some point in time. And some of us like to bury our head in the sands about that. Now, a financial advisor might not necessarily help you set up that power of attorney, but they can certainly put you in contact with solicitors, firm, lawyers if you don't have contacts yourselves. And they will ask you about these kinds of things regularly in your meetings to make sure that they're set up and protected for you. I think also financial advisors now talk about, you know, bringing in a third party. So that's bringing in your support system in some of your meetings, which you might notice that your partner, your advisor starts to do a little bit more regularly. Now, let's be very clear. I don't think what any of them are doing is saying from the moment they talk about your support network that all of a sudden you don't have the capacity to make those decisions. That is absolutely not the case. I think what we see, unfortunately, sometimes on the acute side of things, I guess, is where powers of attorney aren't set up, or we see abuses of powers of attorney. So where things go wrong, and I think a lot of people, your loved ones, will agree to be your power of attorney if you ask them, almost undeniably straight away. But are they really thinking about what that means? Do they understand how you want your financial affairs to be looked after, and also the decisions you want made for you in terms of your health and wellness as well? And actually, powers of attorney sometimes at the point where they're asked to step in to take over for a loved one, they're in a point of real distress as well, because there's obviously something going on in your life that's asking them to have to step in, and they don't quite know what's expected of them. They, you know, perhaps if they haven't met your financial advisor previously, a stranger walking into their house to ask about all of these questions about your affairs can feel quite daunting and you know, quite confronting. Whereas actually, if they were to join in the conversation perhaps a little bit earlier, they would know what you wanted. They'd know who your financial advisor was. They'll have met them or spoken to them. So they've already got a base level kind of relationship and an understanding of one another. And they feel less confronted about it. And they know ultimately what you would want them to do with your investments. You know, financial advisors can also talk about care planning for you for the future, for yourself or loved ones, should you need to go into care planning. They are absolutely there to help and prepare you for some of the life events that life throws at you, perhaps anticipated or not. You know, COVID, none of us expected that. I think naturally we are all a little bit more prepared for these sort of crisis type situations or scenarios. I guess I've got no better word for it. And you know, we're increasing kind of awareness of that, but they can help you should you need to take time off, should you be furloughed, should your company go into administration and all of a sudden you're made redundant, which you had never anticipated, or you're having to retire early, where you know that's actually perhaps not a decision that you wanted to take at this point in time. And again, they can help put you back in that driving seat. They can look at your regular contributions, they can look at your withdrawals, they can look at your pension or your investments and stuff, and make sure that you feel a little bit more comfortable and protected and safe, and have the investments to take you through that period of time before you then decide what it is you want to do in the future. We also have a number of our financial advisors now training themselves in things like British Sign Language, because actually historically British Sign Language users found it really difficult to access financial advice, and SJP are really trying to break that down and make sure that far more individuals have good access to good financial advice. We've got a number of individuals as well, one in particular naturally springs to mind, who supports families with additional needs. So SENFA, she calls this, so special educational needs financial advice. And even this partner herself has a son who is severely autistic, actually can't speak, can't communicate with anybody. And she had set up trusts and pensions and all kinds of financial advice for him to inherit ultimately when she wasn't here to protect him anymore. And even she hadn't realized that there are minutiae details in and amongst that where actually if it's not set up correctly, because that individual doesn't have capacity, they can't inherit the wealth that you're leaving. So she had to unwind all of that and start again. And again, your financial advisors are actually in a beautiful position to help you understand these things, these minutiae, these difficult kind of aspects of financial planning, and really help and support you. So hopefully that helps you see actually some of the value of the work that your financial advisors can provide if you're not already having those kinds of conversations. Does that make sense, Eddie?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I sort of take us back thinking about digital assets and what we can do, and just looking at some of the questions that are coming in. So what can you do to sort of ensure that your assets are passed over? Well, fundamentally, having a will is good housekeeping, financial planning housekeeping, and it's something that absolutely we would always recommend for all clients to do. Making sure it's up to date is really important. When we did a bit of research last year, autumn of last year, the research had about 71% of individuals haven't actually referred to their digital assets in their will, and it's a subject that doesn't really come up in many conversations, and actually it's something that we would encourage everyone to start thinking about. When it comes to a will, it's probably worth just remembering that a will is a public record and it will be published. So absolutely what you don't want to do is to list all your accounts and your username and passwords in that, because obviously it will be published. What you can do though is you can consider having a side letter which details what you want. Now that letter can stay private, and it tells the executors what they need to know with regards to your digital assets. And obviously that letter can be kept up to date. A will, to change a will is a bit more complicated. To change the letter is an easier thing to do. So certainly solicitors would probably encourage you to make reference to the letter in your will, and then keep that letter up to date. Now, talking to a couple of people and the different strategies they use, I was talking to someone yesterday who said that what they've been doing is they've been splitting their passwords so that they give two people half each. It's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, and they can only access the other half via the solicitor, and there's a mechanism in place to do that. So depending, you know, how important the password is to you and how you want to do it, there are different things you can do. There's obviously password managers there are different online accounts as well that get activated if there was a death or incapacity. Then they can be activated and access to certain people that you nominate in those circumstances. But they have to go and prove that you are with a death certificate, or it proves that you've lost capacity. So there are definitely things you can do. You know, in terms of my own situation, you know, I have a very clear plan. My wife and my family know what that plan is, and it's a conversation that we have. What some people do, as well as when you have a will, you have your executors of the will, who are the people who manage your affairs on death. Those executors, in addition, you could, for example, have a digital manager. So you appoint a digital manager who is someone that you trust, who can manage your digital affairs, because sometimes the executors are not people who would be naturally comfortable with dealing with your digital assets, your digital life. So you can do that without giving them the responsibility of being executors. You can have them as a digital manager. What I said before around having an inventory is really important, keeping that inventory up to date, making sure people know where that inventory is, and also knowing how those passwords can be accessed as well. What I'm not saying is to sort of just, you know, freely give your passwords out to whoever, or necessarily write them down and leave the password details lying around next to your computer. But having a strategy is really, really important. And as I said, there's a number of different tools out there that people can use. I think in addition to your digital life, it's important to also think about your, you know, getting all of your paperwork in place, talking to your financial advisor. I have a financial advisor, and making sure that financial advisor, an SJP partner in my case, making sure you know, they know what the plan is. And also for me, one of the things that's really important to me is making sure my wife and my children have a relationship with that financial advisor, because ultimately on my death, it will be them that need to go to the financial advisor, the SJP partner in this case. And therefore, it's really important that the first time they talk to that financial advisor isn't on my death or when I was incapacitated. So we have built you know, a really good plan in place, and you know, if and when the event happens, that there is definitely a relationship there. The other thing I think that's really important is have those difficult conversations. One of the conversations I was having yesterday with an advisor was the concept of a family wealth meeting. So bringing the different generations of the family together and actually openly talking about what's happening. Grandparents explaining to their children and grandchildren, perhaps, what is the plan, how they would like their affairs dealt with, moving wealth through the generations, utilizing wealth so that maybe the grandchildren can actually get the benefit rather than waiting until until the grandparent dies. But having a strategy, but openly talking about that strategy, and people knowing exactly what to do if there was a death or incapacity. Having a power of attorney or lasting power of attorney is really important. I updated mine recently. One of the things that you can do, and I think it's really important to do, is whilst you have capacity yourself, you can actually certify your lasting power of attorney. And for those that aren't familiar with that, that is a way of empowering someone to look after your affairs, either financial or welfare. And they are absolutely split, governed by the Court of Protection. And in essence, you set these up, and I can decide. In my case, I have given my wife the power of authority now, if ever there was a situation, but also in my if I was incapacitated, she then has the welfare rights as well and obligations, and it sets out the rules. But these two documents can be certified now by me, and therefore, if they needed ever to be used, people want to have a certified copy, a copy that says this is a true copy of the original, and therefore that's been done already, and therefore it's one job that doesn't need to be done. Also, you can set them up online as well. The Court of Protection have an online. So rather than having to send a piece of paper to someone registered and then getting that piece of paper back, and maybe they send it to you registered back again or lose it, you can actually send them electronically to the organization as well. So these are things that just make life a little bit easier if ever you need to have use of that. What I would say to everyone is make sure your will, your lasting power of attorneys, you keep them up to date. There should be no surprises. If you've got executors, why not get your executor to talk to your financial advisor today? And the other thing also, and we sometimes see it, is trustees or executors. They sometimes move abroad, which makes life a little bit more complicated when that happens. Alternately, they may die or lose capacity. So making sure that those executors and those power of attorneys, those attorneys basically are still the right people to look after your affairs. The other thing that I would always say is we can have a plan, but sometimes you need a plan B, because there's always the unexpected happen, and Hannah touched on that already. So have your plan B. Use, for example, cash flow planning tools with your financial advisor, which allows you to visually see what plan A is, but then have that conversation about the what if. The what if this happens, the what if that happens, how would that impact on my life? And the cash flow planning tools are great for those what if scenarios. So you have a plan, you can hopefully stick to your plan, but if there's anything that disrupts your plan, you've already thought about plan B and maybe even plan C, and always plan for the unexpected. The final sort of thing that we often talk about is, and hopefully this is no surprise, is take professional advice. One of the greatest benefits of talking to an SJP partner is it's their day job. They do this day in, day out. They're talking to clients like you, and in essence, what you may be something that's unusual for you and you haven't experienced it before is something that your advisor would have experienced many times. And if you think about the team behind the SJP partnership, there's over 2,000 people who are here to help, like Hannah, like myself, and therefore the SJP partnership can always come to people like us, and we are specialists, and therefore we are very familiar with many different scenarios that occur on a regular basis. So having that depth and breadth of expertise within SJP, from your partner to the experts in the business, really helps give you a solid plan. Just want to sort of finish on something called Swedish death cleaning, which is DOS standing, and I think it's something that I was introduced to about 12-18 months ago, and it's about thinking about how you sort out your affairs. And there's a great book called The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. It's a really simple book. It's about 100 or so pages. It's light reading, but it's actually something that really helps thinking about how you sort your own life out, but in terms of your affairs, but also in terms of if you have parents or grandparents that maybe you want to talk to them and help them just organize everything. Something probably that people will do probably from 65 onwards. I'm 58, so I've started early. But in essence, I'm someone who bought my house 35 years ago. We've been in there when we moved to our house. We had Pickfords to move everything for us, and I thought it would be a great idea to put everything in the loft and also keep all the Pickford boxes. 33 years later, I still had them in the loft. All the boxes were unopened, and I managed to take most of it down to the dump, because I realized after 33 years maybe I didn't need the stuff I brought with me. And I think we all accumulate bits and bobs over the years. One of the things I think that people often do is that they try and tackle the personal stuff first. Their pictures. I'm going to sort out my pictures and throw stuff away. And it's an incredibly emotional thing to do. So actually the easiest thing is to start on the impersonal. We've been lucky, we're doing work to our house, we have to empty every single room out. Literally been taking everything out of the room and working out what comes back into the room. That is cathartic, because the amount of stuff that you can throw away it is really good. So just think about what you want to keep, what you want to sell, what you want to donate, what you want to give to family, and just gradually go around and think about tidying up everything. The other thing is, as we get older, and the number of people living in your home has reduced. Do you need 24 plates when there's only 6 people or 4 people ever going to be using those plates on a regular basis? So just getting your stuff to the right number is really important. And I think the other thing that's really important is within families is have that conversation. If you're a grandparent and you want help, chat to your children and your grandchildren. Ask them for help. Ask them for what stuff they want to keep and have, and it's really helpful to do that. I'm just looking at some of the questions, Hannah, that were coming through.
I've got them open. Would you like me to read a couple out to you, or do you want to cherry pick in there?
So I think this password seems to be one of the ones that what do I do with passwords? As I said, there are a number of tools out there. We don't specifically recommend any particular tool, but I think having something, some sort of password tool is really important. There are a number of sites which can store pictures for you as well. Once again, we don't specifically recommend any, but yes, definitely having some system in place. Online tools are great. One of the problems is, I was talking to someone yesterday at an event, and they were saying that they had a client who was brilliant. They were fantastically organized. The only problem is everything was password protected, and they couldn't get into the system the person had set up to organize their life. So everything was inaccessible. So just thinking it through and if you're going to have all these password systems and everything else, thinking through how are you going to give access, and that access may be via your solicitor. This concept of having a password, splitting your password, giving it to 2 different people, and then only getting access to the combined password when a certain event happens. So there's things like that you can do, and using your solicitor to do that. But I think it's really important. It's really important just to think about how someone will access the plan that you've put in place. And as I said, this advisor yesterday said it was a real nightmare doing that. Another question I think that's come through is around digital managers. So you can obviously the will, you can set up a digital manager in your will if you wish to do so. So that's fine. And giving them a framework like a will says to the executors what you can and can't do, what my wishes are. Exactly the same, what I would suggest you do with a digital manager. Tell them what it is you want. I also think it's really important to talk to people beforehand. Let's not make it a surprise that someone is your executor and the first time they find out is when you die. Talk to them, make sure they know, talk to them about your wishes. So nothing is a surprise. Have those difficult conversations. I think we're quite reserved as a nation when it comes to difficult conversations. And I think it's really important that you do that. And what I would say in terms of your SJP partner is get your SJP partner into that conversation. This family wealth meeting concept, either have the SJP partner as the person helping you coordinate everything, or even chairing it. I would suggest probably there's a family member who's good at chairing it. One of the things sometimes we see with some of the family wealth meetings is the way families are structured is you tend to find there's one very dominant person in the family, and how does everyone get a say? Well, it could be that you have one of those talking sticks, and the only person that can talk at the time is the person that's holding the talking stick in one form or another. But making sure, like you would do in business or any other meeting, making sure everyone gets an opportunity to put in, making sure it's a really inclusive meeting, because what you need is the whole family, all of the generations, to come together and really maximize the power of the family unit to help that. For those people that don't have a strong family unit, thinking about your friends, who would your third party be, that if you needed someone to come into a meeting, who would that be? And really help them understand what is it that you need and help if you were to bring them into a meeting. We always encourage, certainly individuals who've got vulnerable characteristics, we always encourage them to bring a third party into the meeting, whether that be family or not, but making sure that they engage with a third party. And that helps them with the conversation, remembering what's happened, bringing a different perspective into the conversation, and it's really powerful. And I know, Hannah, you've done a bit of work on that, haven't you, with third parties?
Yeah, we have, and actually, if you want to ask your financial advisor about it in a little bit more depth and detail, they should certainly be able to answer that for you and talk about who the best person to have in the room is, and again go into the depths of it a little bit more. And of course, you can also reach out to us via them, and we can explain it to you a little better too.
Yeah, so the questions come in around digital wills and how do you write them. Ultimately, the will would be written by a solicitor. There's a step who guides solicitors in terms of writing wills. We've got a number of different wording that you can build in. The key with writing your will, or even a digital will, the key is the solicitor really understanding what it is that you want. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Having that digital manager might be the appropriate thing to do. Certainly having a letter with your wishes that you can update probably would be the right thing to do. Definitely not putting your passwords into your will, so then it becomes a public record. So thinking about the secrecy, the data protection issues, all of that sort of stuff is really, really important.
There's a good question. I'm sorry, Eddie.
Yeah, go on.
There's a good question here that says, it's from a client, I'm guessing. I keep all of my passwords even in a black book. If I predecease my wife, is she in order to access my financial accounts without having given express permission in my will?
I mean, what you'll find is your terms and conditions don't allow that. And I think the thing that's really important to do is just to note that, if you've got bank accounts, that type of thing, then if you're going in, I understand that some people might do it, but if you're going in and someone has died, now that's an asset that should be frozen. When my father-in-law died, he had accounts. If we had wanted to go in and use the passwords and everything else and move his money out, technically, I'm sure we could have physically done that. But the reality is, the obligation on us it was his money. We have to wait for probate, and therefore we to go in after someone has died is certainly not something that you should do. So it comes back to the point I made before around, what do the terms and conditions say? And we absolutely wouldn't encourage people to sort of go against terms and conditions and the rules, and certainly not against the the legalities. If someone has died, then you have to wait for probate to move money. So that's definitely what our guidance would be. And from SJP's perspective, when you notify us of a death, then obviously we have to follow all the sort of probate rules and everything else that occurs.
There's another similar question about how does having an LPA set up help with ensuring my digital assets are accessible to others? And I guess it's very much the same thing. So what you're doing with your power of attorney is giving that particular individual express permission to act on your behalf, either in your finances or on your health and welfare. The assumption is in creating the power of attorney, and you can make notes to the effect of what it is you want them to have jurisdiction over, but you've picked somebody that understands what it is that you want, how you'd want them to act, how you want them to look after your assets. And so that individual can then make sure that they've got access to your digital assets, they've got the passwords, etc. I would assume, hopefully somewhere you've shared them with you, and they can then share them with the individuals that you want them to share them with. So again, it's all about making sure that you've written your wishes rather than assuming that people understand them along the way, I think.
Yeah. And I think there's one final question which I think we'll end on, which is in relation to phones. And obviously we live our lives on our phones, and finger recognition or facial recognition to access it. One of the things that the phone companies are now doing, so Apple or Android are doing it, and Samsung, is there's now a legacy contact option. And on that legacy contact option, which you can follow through, is you can set up on your iPhone, in my case, I can set up a legacy contact, and that legacy contact allows the person I've nominated, which is my wife in this case, allows her to go to Apple and get access to all my details when she can prove that I have died. So what companies are now really thinking about is how they can help you do that. So what I would say to you is, if you have a phone, is check out the legacy contact bit, make sure you've put those details in there, and then make sure that you make life easier for your loved ones if they were bereaved or you were incapacitated. And on that note, with a minute to go, hopefully you found this session really helpful. It's an evolving area of planning, and hopefully you've got some hints and tips. We're through your SJP partner. We're always really pleased to hear from you, and obviously we can offer guidance and help. And it just leaves me to say thank you so much, Hannah, for your insights today, and thank you everyone who's joined us today, and hope you have a brilliant rest of the day. So thank you so much.
Thank you.